going to caveat everything that I say here today on this show with this thought. I am 100% for the separation of church and state. In all the years I've been doing this, I don't think I've ever said anything that could be construed as somehow or another Dave is in favor of church-state cooperation, or not cooperation, that's probably the bad word, but the establishment. I'm a very big believer in the Establishment Clause. I'm a very big believer that the separation of the church and state is for best. I'm a very big believer that a secular government is, well, divinely ordained in a way. That said, I will never push my faith, my religion, my beliefs as the solution to what government should be doing. That's not what this is about. That said, it is a fact that much of our law and our moral traditions come from the Judeo-Christian ethic. And therefore, it is logical to understand that there are applicable lessons in those traditions that apply to our legal and ethical systems that we can learn from. And that's what I want you to get today. I'm not saying that we should do it this way. What I'm saying is there are things we could learn from this and take them with us. In the book of Judges, or Shoftim, as we call it, there is a story that I'm going to guess most people just skip over. It's not a pleasant story. It is a horrifying story. It is a story of a man who is traveling across Israel. At that time, there was no king. Israel was run by the judges and by the Sanhedrin, the court, the high court. And each man, as the scriptures say, sort of did what was right in his own eyes. That's not quite what was happening, but you get the idea. And this man was traveling across the country, and if you happen to look at the map of the country, you'll notice that if you're going north to south, anywhere to anywhere, you got to go through Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, which controls Jerusalem and Jericho, which are the two religious centers of the nation of Israel. And so it was that this man crossing Israel found himself spending the night in a little town called Gibeon in Benjamin. He was not a Benjaminite. He was, doesn't matter what he was, I don't remember, but he wasn't a native of that area. He was clearly an outsider. He was clearly someone who was just a visitor. Now, we know that there are certain expectations made of people when there are visitors. We have this story, of Abram greeting the angels and prostrating himself before it. We have this whole story of Lot in the city of Sodom and how they mistreated their visitors. And we have an understanding, an innate understanding of what is right and what is wrong, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. In this terrible story in the book of Judges, which you can read for yourself, it starts in chapter 19. There is a man, this man comes there, and he has his wife, his concubine that he's married, and he has to sit in the street because nobody invites him in as a guest, as a traveler, which is tragic enough. But without going into a lot of detail, because I really don't want to, it's a very disturbing story. The man is finally invited into a man's house, but there are local hooligans who, well, they do things that they shouldn't do. And in a night of debauchery, probably fueled by alcohol, probably fueled by just evil, they rape and ultimately kill the man's wife. She is murdered and left to die, is what the scripture says. The man is appalled by this, and his actions subsequent to this are even more shocking in many ways. He cuts up the body of his beloved concubine, his wife, and he sends the pieces to the other tribes of Israel as a, this is what happened to me in Benjamin, come avenge me message. And in one of the most just, I consider it to be one of the more upsetting stories of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, a civil war ensues. Rather than apologize and turn over the culprits who did this, Benjamin says, no, screw you guys. That's just fine with us and their behavior, and a civil war ensues. And tens of thousands of people die in this civil war. And the scriptures talk about the actual battles and back and forth and the whole nine yards, and it almost reads like this morality tale that's, I don't know, it's kind of a weird read at times. You find yourself going, wait, what? Why is this important? Why do I need to know about this? Because again, if it's there, there's a reason for it. And you find yourself asking yourself this question at the end of all this is, why is this story even being told? For whom is this story being told? Clearly, it's a morality lesson for someone. But is the lesson just when a guest comes to your town, you're supposed to treat them better than this? Or is the lesson when somebody doesn't treat you well, you cut up the body and send it out and start a civil war over it? Is one person's life really worth all that? Who's responsible for the deaths of these tens of thousands of people? Of course, the rabbis in later years would discuss this story at great length. Probably because they don't have a whole lot else to do. No, I made that part up. But the question you find yourself asking is, isn't this the kind of question that a judge, a court, should be deciding? Who's responsible for the death of this woman? Who's responsible for this war? Who caused all this? And what are we supposed to do about it? Israel, as you may have known, was overseen by the judges, or as they would come to be called later, the Sanhedrin. These are 71 men. And there were very specific criteria for who could be on the Sanhedrin. They must be wise and insightful men with a comprehensive knowledge of Torah and a broad intellectual capacity. They must have some knowledge of other disciplines. For example, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, and the practices of fortune-telling, magic, sorcery, and the hollow teachings of idolatry, so that they will know how to judge them. In other words, it wasn't enough just to say, well, I don't believe in those things. They had to understand them so that they knew why they didn't believe them and why those things were unacceptable. An effort should be made, it was said, to make sure that all the men who are selected are white-bearded. Not making that up. Tall, dignified men who understand subtle matters and who speak most languages so that they will not need an interpreter. What? Yeah, interpretations of things is where things get off the rail. But if all these guys speak all those languages, then it's less likely that somebody would be able to misinterpret something. For the record, in all of this, as you know, the only qualification I have is that I have a white beard. Certainly not tall, not dignified. I'd like to think I understand subtlety. I don't speak a lot of languages, nor am I an expert in the practice of fortune-telling, magic, sorcery. I know a little bit about the hollow teachings of idolatry. But there you go. So if you're ever saying to yourself, hey, Dave, you should be a judge, literally the only qualification I have is that I have a white beard, which probably isn't enough. Just really isn't. Now, the interesting thing about the Sanhedrin, the interesting thing about this court was its job. You might think that its job was to sit there and rule on these cases, but that was not it at all. In fact, The general idea here was that there shouldn't be any cases coming before the Sanhedrin. I worked for a man many, many years ago, senior chief. It's really not fair to name him because, well, his name was Neil Petrie, and he and I did not like each other. We did not get along. We did not see eye to eye on anything. And one of the things that he believed fervently was that no discipline problem ever got out of our office door. So if we had a student or an instructor or somebody who had an issue, a discipline problem, we handled it in-house. It never got to the department head, let alone to the XO or the CO for captain's mast. And in the 4 years I worked for him, we never had a student or a staff member go to non-judicial punishment for an incident. We handled a lot of stuff in-house. And it wasn't until years later that I actually kind of came to see his point of all that. And part of that is my study of my faith and this idea that the Sanhedrin had, which was we handle things in the field. These 71 men were supposed to gird themselves and travel from town to town. And their job was to teach the people directly what the laws were, what the expected behavior was, how they were supposed to do things, how they were supposed to live. In the Talmud, it actually says that if the Sanhedrin has to carry out an execution, in other words, if a Jewish person has to be put to death because of a crime, it's actually the court, the judges that have failed because they have not taught the people properly, and they should be lashed as well. I thought that's a fascinating concept, isn't it? Now, there's an obvious comparison here, isn't there? Should be pretty obvious these days. United States Supreme Court. We think about how these people are chosen. Do we have any objective, reasonable criteria for how they're chosen? Are they wise, insightful people with comprehensive knowledge, broad intellectual capacity? Do they have knowledge of other disciplines that they're not necessarily professionals in? Medicine, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, fortune telling. Are they tall, dignified? Do they speak other languages? Or do we select them solely upon their political reliability and their perceived idea that they are going to vote on cases and laws and interpretations of things the way that whoever appointed them wants them to vote? So I look at those 9 people there on the screen. I wonder if we had different criteria that matched how the judges were chosen for the Sanhedrin, supposed to be chosen. I wonder how many of those people would actually be there. Now, the Supreme Court, interestingly enough, when it began in 1789 with the Judicial Act of 1789, was laid out a little bit different than we're used to today. In 1789, there were established 13 district courts. And today we have about that, but you get the idea. There were 3 circuit courts, the Eastern Circuit Court, the Middle Circuit Court, and the Southern Circuit Court. And of course, there was one U.S. Supreme Court, and that was it. There weren't a lot of cases, but the justices of the Supreme Court and the district courts were expected to do something called riding circuit. So you would send out 2 of the district court judges and 1 Supreme Court justice, so 3 people, a 3-person panel, and they would go to each of those circuits, the East and the Middle and the South, and they would then hear cases. They would meet with people. They would talk to people. They would explain things to people. And in essence, they would teach the people what they needed to know about, what was going on. It was not an easy life. Justice Iredell, can never pronounce his name. I don't know if it's Iredell or just Iredell. James Iredell was one of the original justices of the Supreme Court. He once described riding circuit, a night that he spent at riding circuit, as being compelled to spend the night at an inn with a parcel of worthless young fellows, sitting up drinking, gaming, cursing, and swearing all night. Didn't get much sleep, I guess. There are stories of Supreme Court justices riding circuit who are robbed at gunpoint. They fall into rivers. One is injured in a carriage accident and nearly dies. Many of the circuit court or the district court judges and the Supreme Court justices quit because it's just too hard. Instead of being in a cushy Washington, D.C. or New York City hotel, they are on the road literally 10 to 11 months out of 12. And they are spending their time away from their families. And while there's a great calling here, it's hard. It's a mission, but it is hard. And these guys, I don't like it. They complain bitterly about it from the word go. And over the years, Congress begins to tweak it because these judges are going to quit if we keep making them ride circuit. And they don't completely eliminate it. Congress says, well, no, you still should have to, but we'll give you more judges. We'll make the circuit smaller. As transportation improved in the country and you could ride a train, you didn't have to ride a horse. Things got a little different, I guess. But it isn't until 1911 that the United States Congress finally says to the Supreme Court, okay, you don't got to ride circuit no more. You don't got to go out and meet the people. You don't got to go out and be there. And I'm left to wonder if there is a philosophical, at least, connection between the judges no longer riding circuit and the general lack of our legal system, the general lack of understanding of the American people. No longer can you go to the district court and just, when you hear the Supreme Court justice is coming and you go, well, I'm going to go talk to him. You can't do that anymore because they're not there. It's not the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was very much a calling. It was very much an appointments type system. God himself was basically saying, choose these people, and these people are then dedicated to this point. And so you can't, blame a Supreme Court justice for going, well, it's not really the job that I wanted, although it was in the law and I agreed to take it. But the Sanhedrin, more of a calling than the Supreme Court, but there is a certain element to it, isn't there? I always said about the presidency, I never trust a person who says they want to be president because they have ulterior motives. And sometimes I wonder about judges and certainly Supreme Court judges. Do they have an ulterior motive for wanting to be in that position? It's just something I wonder about every now and then. But these judges, both in the Sanhedrin and in the U.S. court system, are compelled by law to make the decisions that affect the lives of the people. So when we go back to this civil war, when we go back to this conflict in Shoftim 19, the rabbis asked the question, whose fault is this war? And they come to a very surprising answer. It isn't the Danites who murdered the woman, who were just basically, worthless fellows, in the words of the Supreme Court justice. It isn't the man who cut up her body and sent it off. It isn't the other tribes who were outraged at this action and instead of saying, that's crazy, decided to attack. It isn't the tribe of Benjamin who, instead of saying, well, here's the guys that did it, you punish them as you see fit. No, we're going to stand up for this and defend it. It isn't any of those people's fault. You know whose fault this whole thing is? It's the Sanhedrin's fault. It's the men who were supposed to be out in the people teaching them, working with them, judging them there, showing them the right way. They weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were sitting in comfort and relaxing and enjoying the privileges of their position instead of doing what they were supposed to be doing. And so, because they failed to teach the people how to properly behave, they were compelled then to witness a civil war in which tens of thousands of people died. We still hadn't really solved the real problem. Now, I wonder about that today. Who teaches us? We understand Montesquieu's idea of a virtuous citizen as one who is engaged and one who is involved. But where do we learn this stuff? I mean, some of us, I get it, are self-taught. Some of us are interested in it, and we cling to it, and we go, well, I want to learn. And we go learn. But what about the average person? How do they even know? Do you know how many volumes of laws we have? They say that today every American breaks, a dozen laws every day and doesn't even know it? Well, whose fault is that? Is it our fault because we don't know? Or is it somebody's fault for not teaching us? Now, I'm not saying that the Supreme Court judges should be out holding classes every day. It's not what I'm saying at all. But there is a certain responsibility to those who have chosen to serve in government to reach out to people and say, this is the expectations. This is what we believe. This is what we want. And instead of looking at those qualifications for leadership, we're putting people in those positions to judge over us. Instead of looking for people who are wise and have great understandings of things and who have vast experience across many elements of things, instead of looking at people who are dignified and understand, subtle matters, speak multiple languages, don't need interpreters, who understand comprehensive knowledge of the things, the laws that rule over us, and can teach them to us. Instead of those qualifications, what do we look for in our qualifications for the people that we put over us? And I'm not just talking about Supreme Court judges. That's easy. It's easy to say these people are, bizarre. What about our politicians? What about the people who, lead us on a day-to-day basis? Do we choose them for their qualifications, or do we choose them because they are likely to bring home the bacon, as it were? In the conclusion of all this, the Rabbi once said, the only behavior that makes one worthy of sitting in the high court is one that brings life to the world, not the opposite. Unquote. Now, it's easy to say, oh, see, this applies to abortion. The abortion argument, Dave, that's what you're doing. You're arguing about abortion. No, I'm not. Remember that the failure of the Sanhedrin, the failure of the judges to teach everyone how to properly behave, resulted in a civil war that resulted in the death of tens of thousands of people. The Midrash, the Talmud teach us that if a Jew has to be put to death, it's the failure of the court. If a Jew has to be lashed, it's the failure of the court. They should be lashed too. When our people fail to live up to the expectations of our Constitution, when we fail to live up to the expectations of the promise of the United States of America, yeah, we screwed up. We raped and murdered the concubine. We cut up the concubine's body. We invaded Dan and created a civil war. We did all of that. But at the root cause of all of that, I wonder if it's because we put the wrong people who have none of the qualifications that we should be looking for into any of the positions that should be teaching us how to be, what's that word that they use? Oh, yeah, more perfect in our union.